My mother liked to remind me of my place. "You're the most useless child we have." She said it in the glass elevator at Weldon and Pike Holdings, where she was vice president, and I was just a contractor. She didn't know the platinum card she swiped for wine dinners was backed by a credit system I built. And the night I turned on the boardroom projector, I showed everyone who really funded her life. My name is Iris Calder. I am 32 years old, and this morning, like so many others, began with the cold, impersonal grandeur of Stonefield. The city never truly wakes. It merely shifts its state of slumber. In the pre-dawn light, it's a creature of blurred edges and muted colors, its glass towers reflecting a sky the color of wet slate. A persistent drizzle, more mist than rain, clung to every surface, giving the air a tangible weight and the streets a slick, dark sheen. Inside the lobby of Weldon and Pike Holdings, the world outside was reduced to a silent, streaming tableau through the 40-foot windows. Here, the only sound was the sharp, rhythmic echo of heels on polished marble, a sound that bounced off the cold stone and steel columns, creating a lonely percussion in the cavernous space. Each click was a declaration of purpose, a signal of belonging in a place designed to make one feel small. I clutched my laptop to my chest, its hard edges a grounding pressure against my ribs. Beside me, exuding an aura of thermal control that defied the damp chill, stood my mother, Vivian Calder. She was the executive vice president of mergers and acquisitions, a title she wore with the same tailored precision as her charcoal gray suit. Her posture was an architectural marvel of straight lines and controlled power. Her presence so commanding it seemed to bend the very light in the lobby around her. We stood before the bank of elevators, our reflections distorted and elongated in the polished brass doors, one a titan of industry, the other a ghost in her orbit. The elevator arrived with a soft, expensive sigh, its interior a sterile cube of mirrored steel and recessed LED lighting. As the doors slid shut, sealing us in, the ambient noise of the lobby vanished, replaced by a low, almost subliminal hum. My mother didn't look at me. Instead, her gaze was fixed on the small, integrated screen on the elevator wall, which cycled through corporate announcements and employee spotlights. With a flick of her wrist, she swiped her security card, and the screen shifted, displaying a welcome message and her access credentials. Then, with another tap, she pulled up the visitor and contractor logs for the executive floors. My profile appeared, a bland, corporate headshot next to a few lines of text. Her perfectly manicured finger, the nail a slash of deep crimson, tapped the screen. "Contractor," she read aloud, the word itself an indictment. The hum of the elevator seemed to intensify, filling the small space with a sound like a held breath. "Iris, are you still not qualified for a permanent position? After all this time? I had to pull strings just to get you this risk assessment project. I would have thought you'd want to prove you deserve to be here on your own merits." I said nothing. My throat was tight, a familiar knot of unspoken retorts forming and dissolving before they could reach my lips. My merits were not the issue. My merits were the foundation of a silent empire she knew nothing about. The laptop in my arms contained analyses so complex they would make the company's top data scientists weep, but in her eyes, I was still the child who struggled with calculus, the daughter who chose a state university over an Ivy League legacy. She sighed, a sound of profound and theatrical disappointment. She turned her head slightly, her sharp blue eyes meeting mine in the reflection of the polished steel wall. The lighting was unforgiving, carving lines of impatience around her mouth. "You are the most useless child we have," she said. The words were not shouted. They were delivered with the calm, cutting precision of a surgeon's scalpel, designed for maximum internal damage. "Try not to embarrass me in front of the board today. Just sit, listen, and don't speak unless you are directly addressed. The adults will handle the presentation." The scent of her perfume, a sharp, metallic floral, filled the enclosed space, feeling less like a fragrance and more like an anesthetic, numbing the air itself. It was a scent that clung to my childhood memories. the smell of her leaving for work before I was awake and returning long after I was in bed. In the mirror, I could see a faint smudge on the otherwise immaculate surface. Just over her shoulder, the harsh LED light caught it, turning it into a small, greasy nebula. That smudge, her perfume, the icy tone of her voice, it all felt like evidence being presented in a trial where the verdict had been decided decades ago. I was useless. Case closed. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth, my gaze dropping to the floor. My answer wasn't in words. It was in my coat pocket, a quiet, heavy weight against my hip. 3 small, identical USB drives, their brushed metal casings cool to the touch. They were labeled with a simple, clean font: Audit A, Audit B, and Foundation. 3 keys to 3 different rooms in the prison she had unknowingly built for herself. Audit AA contained a comprehensive analysis of the company's recent acquisitions, highlighting financial irregularities that were too consistent to be accidental. Audit B was a deeper dive, a forensic accounting of vendor contracts that showed a clear pattern of kickbacks and conflicts of interest. And Foundation. Foundation was the masterpiece. It was the complete, unassailable financial architecture of the Calder Charitable Foundation, her pet project, her public badge of honor. It was also the instrument of her downfall, and she had handed me the blueprints herself. The elevator chimed softly as it passed the 20th floor. Ding! I counted my heartbeats against the sound, a steady thudding rhythm in my ears. Thud, thud, thud. I focused on my breathing, drawing the cold, sterile air deep into my lungs. Silence is a strategy. I reminded myself, it is not surrender. Every dismissive word, every casual cruelty, every time she had looked through me as if I were made of glass, I had collected them all. I had converted them from emotional slights into cold, hard data, and data, unlike feelings, could not be dismissed. Ding. 30th floor. Her words echoed in my head. Useless. The word had been her favorite for me since I was a child. I was useless for not wanting to go into finance like her. Useless for being quiet and introverted instead of commanding and charismatic. Useless for choosing a path she didn't understand and therefore couldn't control. For years, I had believed her. I had internalized the label until it felt like a part of my own skin. But slowly, quietly, in late nights fueled by coffee and code, I had built a different definition of my own worth, one measured in algorithms and encrypted ledgers. Ding. 38th floor. The executive level. As the door slid open with another whisper of compressed air, my mother's entire demeanor transformed. The hard lines of her face softened into a warm, engaging smile. Her posture, already perfect, somehow became more open, more welcoming. She was no longer a mother chastising her disappointing child. She was Vivian Calder, the charismatic leader, ready to charm and conquer. She stepped out into the hushed, plushly carpeted hallway, her smile already fixed on the chairman of the board, who was walking towards them from his corner office. It was a performance of such practiced perfection that it was almost breathtaking. The woman who had just dissected me with a single sentence had vanished, as if she had never existed. "John, good morning," she said, her voice a warm, melodious river. "Wonderful to see you. I trust you're ready for a productive session." I followed one step behind her, a deliberate, calculated distance. For my entire life, I had been one step behind. In family photos, at holiday dinners, in her public life. I was the shadow that proved the sun existed. It was my designated place in the frame. But today, that position was a vantage point. It allowed me to see the whole board, to watch the performance from the wings before I walked to the center of the stage and changed the play. As she engaged in pleasantries with the chairman, my phone vibrated silently in my pocket. I palmed it, keeping it below waist level. The screen lit up with a notification from my own encrypted network, a system far more secure than the one Weldon and Pike used. The message was simple, a quiet confirmation that the final piece of my plan was in place. Clearance approved. Board session access granted. My contractor-level access had been temporarily elevated. For the next 2 hours, I had the same system privileges as a board member. The digital gates had been opened. I looked up from my phone, my eyes meeting my mother's for a brief second as she glanced back. Her look was a silent warning. Remember your place. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Oh, I would remember my place, standing just behind her, and from there, I would show her who had built the ground she was standing on. Following my mother down the hallway on the 38th floor was like walking through a museum dedicated to her own legend. The air was still and cool, scented with the faint, clean smell of industrial carpet cleaner and old money. Framed prints of architectural renderings lined the walls, depicting Weldon and Pike's global headquarters in various stages of heroic completion. It was all part of the myth of Vivian Calder, the woman who had built herself from nothing. My father had left when I was 7, a quiet exit that was later rewritten into a grand drama of abandonment from which my mother had risen, a phoenix from the ashes of a broken home. She loved to tell the story at company galas and charity dinners, her voice resonating with rehearsed vulnerability. She'd speak of bootstrapping, of fighting for every scrap of respect in a man's world, of raising 2 children on her own with nothing but grit and determination. It was a beautiful story. It just wasn't entirely true. She conveniently omitted the part where, after a few initial years of struggle, the mortgage payments suddenly started arriving on time from an anonymous trust, or how the tuition for my brother's expensive prep school was covered by a mysterious scholarship. She never questioned the source. She simply absorbed the good fortune as her due, a cosmic reward for her suffering. We passed the glass-walled entrance to the main trading floor. Inside, a sea of men and a few women in shirt sleeves stared intently at walls of glowing numbers, a low roar of commerce leaking through the thick panes. My brother, Luca, was in there somewhere. At 27, he was an honorary intern, a position created just for him. It was more of a decorative seat than a job, a place for him to exist within the corporate ecosystem without the burdensome expectation of actual work. He'd spent his days fetching coffee, shadowing a senior trader who found him amusing, and mostly managing his social media presence from a billion-dollar desk. He was the charming, handsome Calder son, the one who reflected my mother's success back at her. He was useful because he was visible. He was a living, breathing testament to the lifestyle she had supposedly earned. The sight of the trading floor brought to mind the memory of last Thanksgiving. The whole family was gathered around the polished mahogany dining table in my mother's penthouse. The city lights twinkled below us like a fallen constellation. My mother, holding a crystal glass of ridiculously expensive Cabernet, stood to make her annual toast. "To family," she began, her eyes sweeping over us. "We have achieved so much because we are built on a foundation of discipline and hard work. Nothing is given, everything is earned." Her eyes met mine for a fleeting second, a flicker of something that might have been pity, before moving on. She had never once, in the 12 years I had been working, asked me what my contractor's salary was. She never asked about my projects, my skills, or my ambitions. The details of my work were as uninteresting to her as the mechanics of the building's heating system. She just expected it to function silently, in the background, without bothering her. My contribution to the family's discipline was to remain invisible. That invisibility was my greatest asset. While Luca was out at parties and my mother was networking at charity balls, I was at home, carving out a second life in the quiet hours after midnight. The dining table would become my desk, covered in textbooks on data forensics, network security, and algorithmic trading. I learned to see the hidden language of money, the way it flowed through the world in rivers of pure data, leaving faint traces that only a trained eye could follow. I passed certification exams that were notoriously difficult, one after another, building a skill set that made me a digital ghost, capable of navigating the deepest recesses of the financial world without leaving a footprint. To my family, I was still just the temp, the vaguely tech-savvy daughter who was good with computers. They had no idea I had become a master locksmith in a world where all the doors were digital. I was a forensic data specialist, but at home, my most valuable skill was my ability to quietly fix my mother's Wi-Fi. Her favorite prop in the grand performance of her life was the platinum card for the Calder Charitable Foundation. She would produce it with a flourish at restaurants, at boutiques, at art auctions. "It's for the foundation," she'd say, a humble smile playing on her lips as the card was swiped. Each transaction was an opportunity for a photo, a quick story for her Instagram feed showing her followers how dedicated she was to her philanthropic work. The flash of the camera phone would glint off the metallic surface of the card. Another snapshot for the Vivian Calder legend. She loved to talk about the foundation's mysterious benefactor. "We are so blessed," she'd say to her friends over brunch. "We have an anonymous donor, one of my business partners who deeply respects our work, who pours money into the fund. It allows us to do so much good." That anonymous donor was me. I was the angel investor. I had built the entire architecture of the foundation from the ground up. It was a masterpiece of legal and financial engineering, a labyrinth of shell corporations, offshore holding companies, and layered trusts so complex that it appeared to the outside world as a benevolent, independent entity funded by an old-money philanthropist. The money that flowed into it was clean, sourced from whistleblower bounties I collected by anonymously reporting corporate fraud, including, ironically, from some of Weldon and Pike's own competitors. I had designed a system that rewarded honesty, and I used those rewards to build my mother a pedestal. It was a bitter, exquisite irony. She was building her reputation on a currency of integrity she herself didn't possess, all underwritten by the useless daughter she so openly disdained. Just last week, I had stood in her gleaming white kitchen, a space so sterile it looked like it was from a magazine shoot, taped to the door of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. Next to a save the date for a gallery opening was a printout from a real estate website. It was a sprawling, glass-walled mansion on the shore of Lake Aston. Below it, in my mother's elegant script, was a note written on a sticky tab. "Target for this year." She had turned from the stove, a wooden spoon in her hand, and tapped the picture. "The foundation is having a banner year," she'd said, not to me, but to the room. "We'll get it. It's important to have goals. Iris, it shows you're serious." I had stood at the sink, rinsing a wine glass, the warm water flowing over my hands. The low, steady hum of the dishwasher filled the silence. The sound was comforting, a mechanical drone that sounded exactly like the rack of servers I kept in a climate-controlled storage unit across town. That was the real engine of our family's fortune. That low, constant hum, the sound of my algorithms running, of my systems monitoring, of my carefully laid plans ticking along. Moment by moment, everything was in place, the data was collected, the trap was set. All it needed was a stage. My mother stopped just before the double doors of the boardroom. She turned, her public smile momentarily gone, replaced by the cool mask of maternal authority. She adjusted the collar of my blazer, a gesture that was meant to look caring but was really about control. "Don't disappoint me in there, Iris," she said, her voice low. "A lot is riding on this." I looked into her eyes, those brilliant, unyielding blue pools, and for the first time, I felt no sting, no flicker of the old hurt. There was only a calm, cold clarity. I gave her a small, tight smile. In my mind, I added a silent note to her warning, a memo to be filed away in my own internal ledger. "And please, don't you disappoint me with the truth. My temporary job, the one my mother viewed as a stepping stone to a real career I was apparently incapable of securing, was a carefully constructed facade. In the digital world, where names and titles are merely strings of characters, I was not Iris Calder, the underachieving contractor. I was the sole proprietor and chief architect of Lattice Arc, an anonymous fintech startup that had become one of the most respected and feared names in boutique corporate credit risk assessment. We, and the royal we, consisted of myself, a bank of self-maintaining servers, and a handful of freelance legal consultants who knew me only by a pseudonym, didn't deal with megacorporations. We specialized in the intricate, often opaque, financial ecosystems of nonprofits, private foundations, and family offices. We built bespoke credit and expenditure platforms for clients who valued discretion above all else. Our algorithms didn't just approve transactions, they learned from them, building a behavioral fingerprint for every client, flagging anomalies with a speed and accuracy that bordered on prescient. One of our flagship products was a corporate card platform designed specifically for social good organizations. It offered robust tracking, seamless expense reporting, and while as a key feature, a generous rebate program. This is where the Calder Charitable Foundation entered the picture. I had, through a series of anonymous referrals, made Lattice Arc the exclusive credit provider for my mother's foundation. The platform was a Trojan horse, and she had wheeled it through the front gates of her life with a triumphant smile. The rebate system was my masterstroke of psychological manipulation. My algorithms were programmed to convert a percentage of the foundation's spending into luxury travel points and exclusive concierge services. To my mother, these weren't algorithmic outputs. They were partner benefits, tangible proof of her status and the high regard in which the financial world held her. She would boast about the first-class flight to Milan or the impossible-to-get reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant, attributing it all to her networking skills and the foundation's prestige. "You see, Iris," she'd explain patiently, as if to a child, "when you operate at this level, people want to be associated with your success. The perks just happen." She had no idea that the people who wanted to be associated with her was the daughter she called useless, and the perks were a calculated stream of data-gathering bait. Every transaction, every swipe of that platinum card, was a drop of ink on a map I was drawing in the dark. The core of Lattice Arc was its real-time anomaly monitoring system. It was designed to detect fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. For most clients, the system ran on a standardized set of parameters. But for the Calder Foundation account, I had written a custom filter. It was a silent, sleepless watchdog programmed with a single directive: to track, log, and cross-reference any and all expenditures associated with Weldon and Pike, its key executives, and their known associates. My mother had unknowingly given me a key to the back door of her entire professional and social network. For 2 years, the data trickled in, a quiet stream of discrete points: a dinner for two at Oraline, a $5,000 charge at the Celestique boutique, a recurring monthly payment to an obscure art consultancy firm. Individually, they were meaningless, the standard expenditures of a wealthy executive, but my system wasn't looking at them individually. It was looking for connections. It was a digital cartographer, taking these scattered islands of data and revealing the hidden continent that linked them all. Slowly, patiently, the system wove these points together into a vast, intricate expenditure graph. It was a thing of terrifying beauty, a constellation of consumption. At the glowing center of this constellation was a single, brilliant star. Vivian Calder, from her. Radiant lines of expenditure shot out in all directions, one thick, steady line connected to Luca, funding a lifestyle of parties, designer clothes, and impulsive trips that far exceeded the salary of an honorary intern. Another set of lines branched out to members of Weldon and Pike's legal department, always in the form of lavish dinners or consulting lunches that coincided with the final stages of a major acquisition. More lines snaked their way to project accountants, marked as discretionary project expenses, but geotagged to high-end golf courses and private clubs. The graph didn't just show that my mother was spending the foundation's money on herself. It showed she was using it as a slush fund to grease the wheels of her corporate ambitions, rewarding allies and silencing potential obstacles. But tracking the spending wasn't enough. That could be explained away as poor judgment, as a blurring of lines. I needed to control the source. I needed to close the loop. A year ago, I used a fraction of my profits to acquire a shell company, a bland, forgettable entity called North Alder Foundation Services. It had no employees, no physical office, just a mailing address and a bank account. I installed it as the primary third-party administrator for a select group of Lattice Arc's clients, including the Calder Foundation. On paper, it was the company that processed the foundation's grants and managed its vendor payments. In reality, it was me. It was the final piece of the plumbing, the drain at the bottom of the sink. The income that funded this entire operation came from a place my mother would never think to look: the corporate conscience. My forensic accounting skills were not just for building systems. They were for tearing them down. Under a different set of pseudonyms, I had become one of the most effective anonymous whistleblowers in the country. I would identify companies engaged in accounting fraud, market manipulation, or insider trading, compile an airtight case, and submit it to the SEC. The bounties for such information were substantial, often millions of dollars. Here was the beautiful circular logic of my machine. I would collect a multi-million-dollar reward for exposing fraud at one corporation. A significant portion of that clean, legally obtained money would then be funneled through a series of trusts into my shell company, North Alder, in its official capacity, would then make a large, anonymous donation to the Calder Charitable Foundation. My mother would celebrate another massive influx of cash from her mysterious benefactor, and then she would spend that money, swiping the platinum card provided by Lattice Arc, creating a perfect, unbroken, and now fully documented financial fingerprint. The money she used to build her reputation for integrity was, in fact, the direct proceeds of exposing the lack of it elsewhere. I was laundering morality. Today, that abstract map of data was going to become a physical reality. It was no longer a complex query running on a server in a darkened room. It was a presentation, rendered in stunning high definition, loaded onto the USB drive in my pocket. The members of the Weldon and Pike Board of Directors, men and women who dealt in billions of dollars and abstract market forces, were about to be given a very simple, very clear picture. They were about to see my mother's financial soul, laid bare on an 8K screen, and the artist who had painted it, the useless contractor, would be standing right there, ready to answer any and all questions about her work. The plan had always been a slow burn, a patient accumulation of data that I would deploy at a time of my own choosing. But the world doesn't always move at a deliberate pace. Sometimes, it accelerates without warning. The pivot point arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet as sterile chime of a calendar notification on my desktop. It was 12:15 on Thursday afternoon. The original agenda for the 2:00 p.m. board meeting had been a routine quarterly review. The updated invitation, however, had a new, single-line item added to the top: urgent review of key vendor contracts and affiliated foundation activities. My heart didn't leap. It locked into place. A sudden, cold gear engaging in the center of my chest. My entire body went still. I stared at the words on the screen. They're black, sans serif font, seeming to vibrate with an energy all their own. Affiliated foundation activities. There was only one of significance: the Calder Charitable Foundation. It was happening, not in a month, not next week. It was happening now. The timeline had collapsed, and the future was rushing toward me. A second notification, this one from a secure, encrypted messaging app, flashed on my phone screen a minute later. It was from Eleanor Hale, Weldon and Pike's general counsel. I had met with her 3 weeks prior, under the guise of discussing potential security vulnerabilities in the company's third-party payment systems. In that meeting, I hadn't shown her everything, but I had shown her enough, a few carefully selected, anonymized data points that suggested a pattern of anomalous spending. I had planted a seed of doubt. Her message now was the proof it had taken root. It contained only 8 words. Bring that anomaly analysis packet you mentioned, E.H. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. She was giving me the opening, the official invitation to bring my data out of the shadows and into the light of the boardroom. The slow, patient game was over. Now, it was a sprint. My mother, predictably, saw the agenda change not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Her text message arrived moments after Hale's, a stark and jarring contrast in tone. "Iris, I see the agenda for the board meeting has been updated. This is high-level corporate governance. It's a good chance for you to observe, but do not speak unless spoken to. Let the adults handle the work. We can't afford any missteps." Let the adults handle the work. The condescension was so reflexive, so deeply ingrained, that I almost had to admire its consistency. She had no idea that she was walking into a room where the most important adult would be the daughter she was ordering to be silent. I didn't reply. Instead, I stood up from my desk and walked to the small, fireproof safe I kept bolted to the floor in my closet at home, where I was working remotely before the meeting. My hands were steady as I spun the combination lock. Inside, nestled in an anti-static foam case, were the 3 instruments of the coming reckoning. 3 identical, matte black USB drives. They were unremarkable by design, the kind of cheap, ubiquitous technology that littered every office in the world, but their contents were priceless. I picked them up, the weight of years of silent work feeling impossibly light in my palm. The first was for the board, labeled Audit A. It contained the high-level data, the visually arresting expenditure graphs, the clear, concise summary of conflicts of interest. It was a presentation designed to be understood in minutes and to be irrefutable. The second drive, Audit B, was for Eleanor Hale and the legal team. It was the deep dive, raw transaction logs, IP addresses, server records, copies of falsified invoices, and the complete chain of custody for the whistleblower funds. It was the foundation for a dozen lawsuits and a federal investigation. The third drive was different. It was labeled Foundation. This one was for my mother. It contained every single one of her transactions, every dinner, every flight, every piece of jewelry. Cross-referenced with her own fawning social media posts, it was a perfect, crystalline mirror of her hypocrisy. It wasn't an indictment for the board. It was a personal confession, written in the language of receipts. I slipped all 3 into the inner pocket of my blazer, the hard rectangular shapes a comforting pressure against my ribs. My phone pinged again. This time, it was an automated alert from my own system. User: I, Calder, clearance elevated, board level, duration, 2 hours. The switch had been flipped. My digital ghost was now a king. I had back-end access to the boardroom's presentation systems, its communication network, everything. There was one final piece to move into place. I stepped onto my balcony, the cool city air a welcome shock. I dialed a number, and it was answered on the first ring. "Go," a man's voice said. "No pleasantries?" He was a freelance network engineer, a brilliant Israeli ex-military cybersecurity expert who worked for me on a retainer. He valued efficiency above all else. "It's time," I said, my voice even. "I need you to be ready for the kill switch protocol." "Standing by," he replied. "The system is armed. When I text you the word lock, I want you to immediately freeze all cards and accounts associated with the Calder Foundation platform. Total asset freeze. No transactions, no inquiries, nothing." There was a pause, the sound of a keyboard clicking. "Understood. Execution will be within 3 seconds of receiving your signal. Good luck." He hung up. I stood on the balcony, looking down at the city. The trap was now fully armed. All that was left was for the target to step on the pressure plate, as if on cue. My phone buzzed with a new text message. It was from Luca. The message was accompanied by a selfie of him grinning in the back of a cab. "Hey sis, big party tonight at the Onyx Club. Can I borrow the foundation card? Gonna be an expensive one. THX. I stared at his smiling, oblivious face. He was asking for the key to the vault. Moments before the vault was to be sealed forever. The casual entitlement, the absolute lack of awareness. It was the perfect summary of the world my mother had built for them. A world of consequence-free consumption. A world that was about to go dark. I didn't answer him. I simply slid the phone back into my pocket. The elevator ride up to the 38th floor was the one I had taken with my mother just that morning, but it felt like a different journey through a different universe. I was alone this time, my reflection a solitary figure in the mirrored walls. I watched the floors tick by, each number a step closer. Outside the glass panel, gray clouds sat heavily on the ledges of the surrounding skyscrapers. The city of Stonefield, which had felt so vast and overwhelming this morning, now looked like a detailed scale model, a set of toys on a vast table. It was a matter of perspective. From down below, the towers were intimidating. From up here, you could see how they were all connected. The elevator slowed. Its arrival announced with a soft chime. The doors slid open. I took a slow, deep breath, the conditioned air filling my lungs. This is not revenge, I told myself, the words a silent mantra in the ticking clock of my mind. Revenge is a messy, emotional, human act. This is an audit. This is an act of clarification. It is simply data having a light turned on it, and when the light comes on, the things that were hiding in the dark will finally be seen for what they are. The boardroom on the 38th floor was less a room and more a declaration of power. It was a long, cold space, dominated by a single, monolithic table of polished black mahogany that seemed to absorb the light. One entire wall was a sheet of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic, godlike view of the rain-swept city below. The other walls were paneled in dark, somber wood. There were no paintings, no decorations, only the relentless gleam of technology. At each of the 12 seats, a small silver nameplate was precisely engraved with the name of a director. In front of each plate, a sleek black microphone stood sentinel, its small LED glowing a soft, ominous red, indicating it was active. The air was cool and still, recycled and sterile, carrying the faint scent of leather and ozone. I took a seat against the wall, a few feet behind the main table, the designated spot for non-essential personnel, the contractor, the observer. My mother sat near the head of the table, radiating a calm, formidable authority. She was in her element, the undisputed queen of this crystal palace. She exchanged quiet, confident words with Chairman Farrow, a man whose stern, weathered face looked like it had been carved from granite. Across from her, Eleanor Hale, the general counsel, sat perfectly still, her hands folded on a leather-bound folio, her expression as neutral and unreadable as a judge's. The other directors, a collection of powerful men and one other woman, murmured amongst themselves, the sound a low, rumbling hum beneath the hiss of the climate control system. Chairman Farrow cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound that instantly silenced the room. The meeting had begun. They moved through the initial agenda items with brisk, ruthless efficiency, market projections, shareholder reports, a brief, jargon-filled update from the head of operations. I watched, my heart a slow, heavy drum in my chest, my hands resting in my lap, one thumb stroking the cool metal of the USB drives in my pocket. Then, Farrow looked down at his agenda. "That brings us to the final item," he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the silent room. "The urgent review of affiliated partner fund transactions. Who will be presenting on this?" As if on cue. My mother straightened, a small, practiced smile on her face. She was about to speak, to take control of the narrative, to frame the discussion in her favor. "I will, Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice smooth and confident. But before she could continue, I raised my hand. It was a small, simple gesture, but in that room, it was a grenade. Every head at the table turned to look at me. The silent observer who had just broken protocol. I saw a flicker of confusion on Farrow's face, a hint of amusement from one of the other directors, and from my mother, I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated fury in her eyes, a look of such incandescent rage that it was a miracle the air didn't crackle. It was gone in a second, replaced by a mask of serene curiosity. "Mr. Chairman," I said, my voice coming out clearer and steadier than I had expected. "If I may, I'd like 5 minutes before Mrs. Calder begins. I have some preliminary data that might provide useful context." A tense silence descended upon the room. Farrow looked from me to my mother, then to Eleanor Hale. who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. 5 minutes, Miss Calder, Farrow said, his tone cautious. The floor is yours. I stood and walked the length of the room to the head of the table. The only sound was the soft click of my heels on the marble inlay. It felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. I could feel my mother's gaze burning into my back. I reached the podium, pulled the USB drive labeled Audit A from my pocket, and slid it into the port on the console. My credentials, already elevated, gave me instant access. The massive 8K screen that covered the front wall, which had been displaying the Weldon and Pike logo, flickered to life. My presentation appeared. The first slide was a stark black background, and on it, a swirling, complex visualization of interconnected nodes and lines began to resolve itself. It looked like a galaxy, a beautiful and intricate web of light. At the very center was a single, large, glowing node, brighter than all the others. From it, hundreds of lines of light radiated outwards, connecting to smaller, dimmer nodes of various sizes. I let them look at it for a moment, letting the sheer complexity of the image sink in. Then, I clicked the mouse. A single label appeared next to the central star. V. Calder. For the past 24 months, I began, my voice amplified by the microphone, each word crisp and clinical. I have been conducting a deep-level analysis of the expenditure patterns of the company's primary affiliated nonprofit, the Calder Charitable Foundation. I gestured to the screen. This is the foundation's expenditure graph. Every line represents a flow of funds from the foundation's central accounts to an external vendor or individual. I zoomed in on one of the larger radiating lines. A new label appeared. Luca Calder. What this data shows, I continued, my tone even and reportorial, is a consistent and significant flow of capital from the Calder Foundation directly to personal consumer accounts, including, most notably, a private account belonging to Mr. Luca Calder. My mother let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of dismissive amusement, a performance for the benefit of the board. Mr. Chairman, this is pure speculation, she said, waving a hand dismissively. My daughter, while a talented data entry contractor, seems to be misinterpreting standard operating procedure. The foundation, like any major nonprofit, has a budget for executive perks and discretionary spending. It's all perfectly normal. I didn't look at her. I didn't argue. I simply clicked to the next slide. A scanned document appeared on the screen. A service contract. The text was dense and legal, but the names were clear. The contract was between the Calder Charitable Foundation and a primary vendor called North Alder Foundation Services. At the bottom of the page, 2 signatures were clearly visible, one for North Alder and one for the foundation. The signature for the foundation belonged to its president, Vivian Calder. This is the primary vendor contract for the foundation, I said. All major grant disbursements and service payments are processed through this entity, North Alder. It was Eleanor Hale who spoke next, her voice quiet, but carrying immense weight. She was looking at the screen, her brow furrowed. I've never heard of this firm, she said. She then looked directly at my mother. Vivian, this contract, which you are the sole signatory on, represents a potential conflict of interest if North Alder is not a fully vetted, arm's-length provider. Before my mother could formulate a response, I clicked to the next slide. The screen split into 2. On the left was a copy of an invoice from North Alder to the foundation for $15,000 for strategic consulting services. On the right, a video began to play. It was grainy, time-stamped security footage from the valet station at the restaurant Aureline. The timestamp read 11:51 p.m. The video showed my mother, laughing with 2 other men, as she handed a platinum card to the valet. The date on the video was the same as the date on the strategic consulting invoice. This invoice for consulting, I said, pointing to the screen, was submitted on a night when the foundation's corporate card, the card that pays North Alder, was actually used to pay for a late-night dinner, consisting primarily of several $1,000s worth of vintage wine. The mood in the room had shifted. The air was thick with tension. The quiet murmuring had stopped. The directors were leaning forward, their eyes fixed on the screen. My mother's face was a pale, tight mask. The smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold fury. Her voice, when she spoke, was dangerously low. "Where did this card come from?" she demanded. Her eyes locked on me. "Who is the financial institution that issued this card to the foundation?" It was the question, the one I had been waiting for, the one she thought would expose me as a rogue agent, a hacker who had stolen data. She was trying to discredit the source. She had just walked into the final chamber of the trap. I met her gaze. My voice was calm, almost a whisper, but the microphone carried it to every corner of the room. Lattice Arc. A few of the more tech-savvy board members frowned, trying to place the name. My mother just stared, confused. The name meant nothing to her. It wasn't meant for her. It was a keyword. Under the polished surface of the mahogany table, my hand was on my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. As the name Lattice Arc left my lips, I typed a single word into the secure messaging app and hit send. Lock. The name hung in the frigid, still air of the boardroom. Lattice Arc. It meant nothing to them. A meaningless piece of corporate jargon. To me, it was the sound of a key turning in a lock. I watched my mother, waiting, for a beat. She held my gaze, her mind clearly searching its vast index of names and competitors for a match, and finding none. It was a moment of pure, blank confusion, and in that moment, the first tremor hit her world. It was subtle, a soft, insistent vibration from her personal phone, lying face down on the polished mahogany beside her folio. Her eyes flickered down to it. A frown, so tiny it was almost invisible, creased the skin between her perfectly sculpted eyebrows. She ignored it. It was a gnat, an annoyance to be swatted away later. Then, just as the silence was stretching into the territory of discomfort, the heavy double doors at the far end of the boardroom swung open. It was Luca. He strode in, a full hour late, radiating an aura of oblivious privilege. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking jacket, the kind that tries to look casual but screams its price tag. He was grinning, his phone held out in front of him like a trophy. "Mother, you have to see this," he began, his voice loud and out of place in the tomb-like quiet. "They've confirmed the VIP tables for the Onyx fundraiser. The guest list is insane." He stopped. He finally registered the atmosphere in the room. The 12 pairs of executive eyes fixed on him, the tension so thick it felt like a physical barrier. His grin faltered. "Oh, sorry, meeting." Chairman Farrow looked at him with an expression of profound disgust. My mother's face, already a pale mask, seemed to lose another shade of color. The humiliation was exquisite, her perfectly managed world, breached by its most coddled and useless product. As Luca began to back away towards the door, his own phone flashed. It was a push notification, a bland, gray banner that slid down from the top of his screen. From across the room, I could read the words. Transaction declined. Merchant. Onyx Club Holdings. His eyes widened. He tapped the screen, a look of utter disbelief on his face. He looked from his phone to my mother, his expression a comical mixture of panic and confusion. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "The card. It's not working." His words hung in the air, a perfect, damning echo of the vibration that had shaken my mother's phone moments earlier. The gnat was no longer a gnat. It was a dragon. For the first time, a genuine crack appeared in my mother's composure. The confident smile, the mask of command. It didn't just falter. It shattered. I turned back to the screen, leaving them to their silent, familial horror. I clicked the mouse. The galaxy of her expenditures dissolved, replaced by a clean, simple flowchart. It was a map of the machine I had built. At the top, a box labeled SEC Whistleblower Bounties. From it, a single, thick arrow pointed down to a box labeled North Alder Foundation Services, Benefiting Entity. From there, another arrow pointed to Calder Charitable Foundation, client account, and from that final box, a spray of arrows shot outwards, like cracks in ice, to dozens of smaller boxes. V. Calder Personal Expenditures. L. Calder Discretionary Account. Vendor Payments. W&P Legal Depicted, and so on. The anonymous donor my mother is so fond of mentioning, I said, my voice cutting through the silence, is not one of her esteemed business partners. The funds that have been pouring into the Calder Foundation for the past 2 years are the direct proceeds of corporate anti-fraud bounties. I let that sink in. Every lavish donation she has publicly celebrated, every charitable act she has taken credit for, was underwritten by a credit and transfer system that I designed, that I control, and that I funded. My mother finally found her voice. It was not her smooth, commanding boardroom tone. It was a low, guttural snarl, stripped of all its polish. "You," she hissed, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the table. "You set me up. This was a trap." I met her furious gaze without flinching. My expression was neutral. "No," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. I turned on the lights. The finality of the statement settled over the room. It was not an attack. It was an audit, a correction, the truth. Eleanor Hale, the general counsel, was the first to act. She looked from me to my mother, her face grim. She addressed the chairman. "John," she said, her voice firm and decisive. "In light of this information, which appears to be comprehensive, I must formally recommend that we immediately suspend all of Vivian's executive privileges and signatory authority, pending a full, independent, and external investigation." Chairman Farrow, who had been watching the entire exchange with a look of cold, calculating fury, did not hesitate. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Done," he said, the word like the fall of a guillotine. "Freeze her privileges. I want a full forensic audit of this foundation and every related transaction by morning." The verdict was delivered. The Queen had been deposed. In the corner, Luca, who had been frozen in place, finally seemed to process what was happening. "But it was just dinner," he stammered, looking around the room at the stern, unforgiving faces. "And some parties. Mom said it was okay." His childish, pathetic defense was met with a silence so profound it was like a physical blow. No one dignified his words with a response. His naivete was no excuse. It was merely a symptom of the disease. I walked from the podium to my mother's seat. She didn't look up at me. Her eyes were fixed on the polished surface of the table. Seeing nothing, I took the final USB drive, the one labeled Foundation, from my pocket. I didn't hand it to her. I placed it gently on the table in front of her, next to her leather folio. It made a soft, clicking sound in the silent room. "This is a complete, unencrypted copy of every transaction," I said, my voice low, for her ears only. "You have a right to review it, just like everyone else." She flinched, as if the words themselves were a physical strike. I turned and walked back to my seat against the wall. The operation was complete. The lights in the boardroom, which had seemed so bright and clear moments before, now felt a degree colder, casting long, sharp shadows. Through the massive window, the city of Stonefield, with its millions of lights and millions of lives, seemed to have receded, becoming a distant, silent backdrop to the cold, quiet ruin in the room. The silence that followed the chairman's decree was a living thing. It was heavier than the mahogany table, colder than the glass wall overlooking the city. My mother sat frozen, a statue of a powerful woman, the command to freeze privileges having apparently been applied to her entire being. Luca, by the door, looked like a frightened child who had wandered into the middle of a predator's enclosure. His earlier bravado completely evaporated. The directors, men who moved markets with a word, were utterly still, their eyes darting between me, my mother, and the chairman, as if watching a new and dangerous form of chess. They had just witnessed a bloodless coup, and they were still trying to understand the nature of the new monarch. I gave them a moment to process the abdication. Then, with the same quiet deliberation as before, I stood and walked back to the podium. The click of my heels was the only sound in the universe. I didn't look at my mother. I didn't look at Luca. I looked at the screen. With a final, soft click of the mouse, I advanced to the last slide. It was the simplest slide of the presentation, and the most devastating. It was a standard corporate ownership flowchart, titled Lattice Arc Holdings, Ownership Structure. At the top was the name of the company. Below it, a line connected to a holding company registered in Delaware. Below that, another line snaked to an anonymous trust. It was a typical, deliberately opaque structure designed to conceal the ultimate beneficiary. But at the very bottom of the chart, there was one final box, a box that connected to everything, and inside it, in the same clean, black, sans serif font as all the others, were two words: Iris Calder. A collective, sharp intake of breath hissed through the room. It was a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. One of the directors let out a low, involuntary curse. They had understood that I was the analyst who had uncovered the rot. They had not understood that I was also the architect of the house. Chairman Farrow leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table, his knuckles white. He stared at the screen, then his gaze, hard and penetrating, swung to me. "Let me be perfectly clear, Miss Calder," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Are you telling this board that you are the founder and principal owner of the financial platform that controls the entire cash flow of the Calder Foundation?" "Yes, Mr. Chairman," I replied, my voice calm and even. "I am." I let the confirmation settle. Then I delivered the second half of the truth, the one that moved me from the realm of family drama into the heart of their own world. "And I am also the individual who anonymously filed the successful whistleblower reports concerning data laundering in the Akron Vantis and Sterling Medicorp merger and acquisition deals last year. The resulting federal bounties were the primary source of the anonymous donations to Mrs. Calder's fund." The atmosphere in the room changed again. The shock curdled into something else, a stunned, grudging respect. Those weren't just any M&A deals. They were two of the biggest, messiest corporate scandals of the past 18 months. They were deals that had cost Weldon and Pike's rivals billions. The person who had brought them to light was a ghost, a legend in financial circles, and she was standing right here, in a contractor's blazer. The sound of a chair scraping violently against the floor broke the spell. It was my mother. She had pushed her chair back, her face a mask of contorted disbelief and rage. The blood had rushed back into her cheeks, staining them a blotchy, furious red. "You did this to destroy me," she cried, her voice raw and ragged, all semblance of composure gone. "This entire thing, it was all to ruin me." I turned to face her for the first time. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life labeling me, diminishing me, defining me by my perceived inadequacies, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold pity. "I did this to protect the company," I said, my voice cutting through her outrage. I gestured vaguely towards the board members. "Their company, your company, and yes," I added, my gaze locking onto hers. "I did it to show you that the word useless has no meaning when the person you're talking about can build an entire architecture while you're busy taking credit for the view from the penthouse." Eleanor Hale, who had been watching me with a look of intense, analytical curiosity, finally spoke. "Why the secrecy, Miss Calder?" she asked, her voice cutting cleanly through the residual emotion. "If your intentions were to protect the company, why this elaborate, multi-year deception?" It was the question, the real question, the one that went beyond the money and the lies. "Because in a place like this," I said, my gaze sweeping across the faces of the powerful men at the table, "value is not measured in competence or in data. It's measured in pedigree. It's measured by the name on your business card. My name is Calder, but it wasn't the right kind of Calder. To you, I was a contractor, a temp, a line item on a budget. If I had come to you a year ago with this data, I would have been dismissed as a disgruntled employee with a family grudge. My data would have been buried, and I would have been fired. The only way to make you see the truth of the numbers was to build a system so powerful, so undeniable, that you had no choice but to look. I had to become my own source of authority. I reached into my blazer and pulled out a slim folio. I walked to the head of the table and placed it in front of Chairman Farrow. "That is a formal proposal," I explained. "It outlines a 3-step process to correct this. 1. The immediate and permanent legal separation of the Calder Foundation from the Weldon and Pike corporate ecosystem. 2. A full voluntary repayment of all misappropriated funds from the Foundation's assets to a charity of the board's choosing. And 3. A new charter for all future affiliated nonprofits, requiring them to use a transparent, board-approved financial platform." Farrow looked down at the folio. Then he looked up, his gaze moving past me to the woman who was still standing, trembling with rage, behind her chair. "Vivian," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth, "do you have anything to say in response to this?" My mother opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at the chairman, at the other directors, at her son, who was cowering by the door. She looked at the city outside, the empire she had thought was hers. Her hand, which had been resting on the back of her chair, moved down to the table and closed around the small, black USB drive I had left for her. She gripped it like a drowning woman clinging to a piece of wreckage. And she said nothing. Her silence was her final, complete confession. I turned back to the board. My work here was done. "I don't need a title," I said, my voice clear and final, a closing statement to a trial that had been running my entire life. "I don't need a promotion or a position. I've already built my own company. All I require is a boundary, a clear, permanent, and impermeable line between what is professional and what is personal." The words settled into the profound silence of the room. Not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact, a new law that had just been written and ratified, in cold, hard data. The elevator ride down from the 38th floor was a journey through a vacuum. The ride up had been a countdown to detonation. The ride down was a descent into the quiet, gray ash of the aftermath. I didn't go back to my apartment. There was one final piece of business, and it couldn't be conducted over a network. It had to be done in person. I took a cab to my mother's penthouse, the city lights smearing into abstract streaks of color through the rain-slicked window. That night, the penthouse felt like a tomb. Usually, it was a space of aggressive brightness, all-track lighting, gleaming surfaces, and the ambient glow of a dozen different screens. Music would be playing from an invisible sound system, and the massive marble island in the kitchen would be cluttered with gift bags from luxury brands and invitations to exclusive events. Tonight, it was dark. The only light came from the vast windows. The city's distant, indifferent glow filtered through a steady, pouring rain. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound. I found them in the kitchen. Luca was sitting on a bar stool, hunched over, his arms wrapped around his knees. He looked small and broken, a child who had just learned that the world was not, in fact, his personal playground. There was no music, no phone in his hand, nothing. He was just staring at the floor. My mother stood at the far end of the island, her back to me, looking out at the rain as it lashed against the glass. The architectural perfection of her posture had crumbled. She seemed shorter. I walked in, and the sound of my shoes on the limestone floor was unnaturally loud. Neither of them turned. I waited. After a long minute, my mother moved. She turned from the window, and in her hand was the platinum card. She walked to the island and placed it down between us. It didn't gleam under the dim light. It looked like a cheap piece of plastic, inert and powerless. It made a flat, dead little clicking sound against the stone. "This thing," she said, her voice a dry, rasping whisper, "is useless now." She looked at me then, her eyes hollowed out pits in her pale face. The fury from the boardroom was gone, burned away, leaving behind a brittle, ugly residue of pure bitterness. "What is it you want from me, Iris?" She threw the words at me like rocks. Is this the part where you get the apology you've always wanted? Is that what this was all for? No, I said, my voice quiet but firm in the vast, silent room. I don't want an apology. I want a correction. I reached into my folio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the island to her. It was a spreadsheet, a repayment schedule. It detailed every personal expenditure, every misappropriated dollar, and outlined a 10-year plan for returning the full amount, with interest, to a new, independently managed trust. Beside it was a second document, a public statement of accountability, admitting to the misuse of funds and outlining the corrective actions being taken. At the bottom of both were 3 signature lines, one for her, one for Luca, and one for me, as a witness. The family signs, I stated, not asked. The company will have a representative certify it. It's the only way to avoid a federal fraud investigation. Luca finally looked up, his face streaked with tears. His voice trembled, the pathetic whine of a boy who has never faced a consequence. I didn't know, he pleaded, looking at me. I swear, I didn't know where the money came from. Mom just said to use the card. She said it was okay. His ignorance was probably real, but it was not an excuse. It was the entire point. Now you know, I said, my voice cold and flat. There was no pity in it. Pity was a luxury he had been afforded his entire life. It had done him no favors. My mother let out a laugh. It was a terrible sound, brittle and sharp, and it broke in the middle, catching in her throat on a strangled sob. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than anger or disappointment in her eyes. It was a look of profound, devastating confusion. I thought you needed me, she said, her voice cracking. All these years, your quietness, your strange little jobs, I thought you were struggling. I thought you needed my help, my protection. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. Her cruelty, her dismissiveness, it had all been a twisted form of love, a misguided attempt to shield the useless daughter she thought couldn't survive on her own. She had built me a golden cage, never once thinking that I might have been forging my own key. I didn't need your help, I replied, the truth of it a clean, sharp blade. I needed the truth. She seemed to shrink. Her gaze drifted around the vast, sterile kitchen. It was a space designed to be photographed, a stage for a life of curated success. The stainless steel appliances gleamed dully. The marble countertops were spotless. Everything was in its place, clean and perfect and empty. There were no cameras here tonight, no adoring followers to filter this image for. This was the raw, unedited footage of her failure, and there was no lens, no angle that could save it. My eyes fell on the refrigerator. It was covered in the props of her public generosity, photos of her at charity galas, thank you letters from organizations she'd donated to, newspaper clippings praising her philanthropic spirit. Without a word, I walked over to it. One by one, I began to pull them down. The little magnets made soft popping sounds as they came free. I gathered the glossy photos and the expensive letterhead into a neat stack. Each one felt like a lie. I slipped the entire collection into a large manila envelope I found in a drawer. Sealing the flap, the evidence of the myth had been collected and filed away. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows in a steady, cleansing rhythm. The sound of the water was like a great washing, an attempt to scrub the city clean, to erase the pretty, boastful words like generous and charitable from the record. I placed the envelope on the counter next to the repayment documents. I had done what I came to do. There was nothing left to say. There would be no tearful reconciliation, no dramatic hug, no Hollywood ending where we all learned a valuable lesson and forgave each other. The damage was too deep. The architecture of our family too fundamentally flawed. Some things, once broken, cannot be fixed. They can only be corrected. I turned and walked away, leaving them alone in the dark with the consequences. As I passed the small office nook by the door, I glanced at the family calendar hanging on the wall. My mother had circled tomorrow's date in red marker. It was the date of a major foundation fundraiser. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a pen, and drew a single, clean line through her note. Below it, I wrote 2 words of my own. Refund Day. The press room was on the 3rd floor, a windowless box designed for the containment and control of information. It smelled of stale coffee, industrial carpet, and a faint metallic tang of anxiety. A dozen rows of chairs were filled with reporters, a hungry pack of faces illuminated by the glow of their laptops and phones. They were a jaded, cynical audience, but today, the air crackled with a rare, genuine electricity. A hastily called press conference by a titan like Weldon and Pike to announce the suspension of a top executive was blood in the water. At the front of the room, a podium stood before a large blue backdrop emblazoned with the Weldon and Pike logo, repeated in a hypnotic pattern. A long table was arranged to one side with a row of microphones. Gleaming under the harsh, white glare of the overhead lights, I stood in the wings, just out of sight, with Eleanor Hale and Chairman Farrow. Farrow looked grim, his face a mask of stone. Hale was, as always, unreadable, her focus absolute. "Are you ready for this?" she asked me quietly, her eyes on the crowd. "I am," I said. It was true. I felt no fear, no stage fright. I felt a strange, profound calm, the kind that comes after a storm has passed, and all that is left is the quiet work of rebuilding. Farrow took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and strode out to the podium. A wave of camera flashes, a fusillade of brilliant white light, exploded across the room, accompanied by a cacophony of clicking shutters. He waited for it to subside, his hands gripping the sides of the podium. "Good morning," he began, his voice a low, authoritative baritone that commanded immediate silence. "I will be brief. This morning, the board of directors of Weldon and Pike Holdings voted to temporarily suspend Executive Vice President Vivian Calder, pending the results of an independent, third-party investigation into the financial activities of an affiliated nonprofit organization. We are taking this matter with the utmost seriousness and are committed to full transparency." He paused, letting the weight of the announcement settle. He was good. His words were precise, corporate, and devoid of any real emotion. He was cauterizing a wound. "We want to extend our gratitude," he continued, "to the individual whose diligence and integrity brought these irregularities to our attention. Their actions have allowed the board to take swift and decisive action to protect the interests of this company and its shareholders." He was about to step away, to signal the end of the statement before the questions could begin, but a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, a sharp-faced woman in the front row, was already on her feet. "Mr. Farrow," she called out, her voice cutting through the tense quiet. "Can you confirm if this individual was an internal employee? Was this a whistleblower from within Weldon and Pike?" It was the question, the fuse being lit. Farrow's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second towards the wings. Towards me, it was the signal. I stepped out from the shadows and walked towards the podium. A new wave of confusion rippled through the press corps. Murmurs broke out. Who was this? A lawyer? An assistant? I was not on their radar. The cameras, which had been focused on Farrow, swiveled towards me, their lenses like the unblinking eyes of a dozen predators. Another series of flashes erupted, momentarily blinding me. I reached the podium and stood beside the chairman. I was a contractor. I had no right to be here, but my access had been granted by a higher authority, the truth. I leaned towards the microphone. "My name is Iris Calder," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the room. "I am a contractor with the Risk Assessment Department, and I am also the founder and chief architect of Lattice Arc, the financial institution at the center of this investigation." A bomb had gone off. The room exploded in a frenzy of noise, shouted questions, the frantic clicking of keyboards, the whir of camera autofocus motors. I held up a hand. The gesture was calm, but it carried an authority that surprised even me. The room, miraculously, fell silent again. They wanted the rest of the story. I had exactly 60 seconds to give it to them. For the past 2 years, I began, my eyes scanning the faces in front of me. Lattice Arc has provided the financial backbone for the Calder Foundation. In that time, I observed a pattern of misappropriation that moved funds intended for charity into the realm of personal and professional gain. I paused, letting the words land. I could feel the heat of the lights on my face. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement in the observation booth at the back of the room, its two-way mirror now a dark, featureless void. I knew she was back there, watching, Vivian Calder, a ghost at her own funeral. I did not turn. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me look for her. "Let me be clear," I continued, my voice becoming harder, sharper. "There is no sponsor here. There is no benevolent donor. There is only accountability. There are actions, and there are consequences. And there is a lesson. If you are going to label someone in your life as useless, you would be wise to first take a very close look at the cash flow they are capable of generating." The flashes were a strobing, continuous wave now, the clicking of the shutters a constant roar. In the midst of the chaos, Eleanor Hale stepped up beside me. She discreetly slid a folded letter into my hand. I glanced down at it. It was on Weldon and Pike letterhead. I could read the first line. "Offer of employment. Director of Financial Integrity. A new position. Created for me. A seat at the very table I had just blown up." I looked at the letter, at this offering of a place within the machine, and I folded it once, decisively, and slipped it into my pocket. My decision made but unannounced. My gaze drifted to the edge of the room. Luca was there, huddled near an exit, the hood of his sweatshirt pulled up, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He was trying to be invisible, a futile effort in the brightest room in the city. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his own hands, his signature now a shackle he had willingly put on. For the first time in his pampered life, he understood that actions were not just things you did. They were things that you owned, forever. I leaned back into the microphone, my voice cutting through the din one last time. "The Calder Foundation," I announced, "will be making a full and complete restitution. Every single dollar will be returned." My hand, resting on the podium, was perfectly still. I looked out at the sea of lenses, at the hungry, waiting world, and I delivered the final, clarifying sentence, the one that would be the headline, the one that would strip away the last veneer of corporate abstraction and make it brutally, beautifully personal. "And by the way," I said, my voice dropping to a near conversational, confidential tone that made it all the more devastating, "she's been living on my points." For a single, glorious heartbeat, the entire room went absolutely silent. The shouted questions died in 100 throats. The clicking stopped. There was only the sound of 100 people processing a perfect, fatal blow. Then, the dam broke. The noise that erupted was not a sound I had ever heard before. It was a roar, a physical wave of human chaos, of shouted names and frantic questions that washed over the podium. The story was complete. I didn't wait for the chaos to subside. I didn't stay for the aftermath, for the frantic questions of the reporters or the grim, hurried conferences of the board members. While the feeding frenzy was at its peak, I simply turned from the podium, walked off the stage, and did not look back. I moved through the stunned silence of the backstage area, my footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. I bypassed the waiting executives and the concerned-looking PR staff. I was a ghost again, but a different kind. I was no longer invisible because I was insignificant. I was invisible because my purpose was complete. I walked to the elevator bank and pressed the button. When the doors opened, I stepped inside. It was the same mirrored cage where my mother had pronounced her verdict on me that very morning. The cold steel, the harsh LED lighting, the silent hum of the machinery. It was all identical, but as I looked at my reflection, I saw a different woman. The tension was gone from my shoulders. The look of quiet, suppressed resentment had been wiped clean from my features. I looked calm. I was alone, and the solitude felt like a victory, a quiet space I had carved out of the noise of the world. The doors slid shut, sealing me in with my own reflection, and the descent began. As the elevator passed the 20th floor, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A single, clean notification. It wasn't a text message or an email. It was a system alert from the financial architecture I had built. The icon was a simple, elegant L for lattice arc. The message was just 2 lines of stark, beautiful text. Refund processed. Full balance transfer. Calder Foundation account balance. 0 card. 0. A perfect, clean, absolute number. It was the most beautiful number I had ever seen. It was the sound of a slate being wiped clean. The balance wasn't just 0. It had been zeroed out. An active, deliberate cleansing. It was the digital equivalent of a building being razed to the ground, leaving a clean, empty lot where something new could, perhaps, one day be built. A balance sheet as clean as the sky after a storm. My phone vibrated again. This time, it was a text message. The sender ID was simply, Mother. The message itself was a single, 3-word sentence, the final volley in a war she had just realized she had been fighting and losing for years. You won. I looked at the words on the screen. You won. She still saw it as a game, a competition, a zero-sum battle for dominance. She was trying to frame my actions in a language she could understand, the language of winners and losers. She would never understand that I wasn't playing her game. I had been refereeing it. My thumbs moved over the keyboard. My reply was just as short. Nobody won. The data was just correct. I hit send. There was no read receipt. I didn't expect one. That was the last communication I would ever need to have with her. The matter was closed. I unlocked my phone again and opened the Lattice Arc administrative app. The real one. The one that only I had access to. I navigated to the client management dashboard. I found the profile labeled Calder Household. It was a special projects file I had created 2 years ago. A container for all the custom filters, alerts, and tracking algorithms I had written specifically for her and for Luca. The status bar next to the profile name was a bright, active green. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment. This file was my life's work. It was a monument to my pain, a complex and beautiful machine built from spite and brilliance, and its work was done. I swiped left. A confirmation box appeared. Deactivate an archive profile? I tapped confirm. The bright green status bar flickered once, and then turned a flat, neutral gray, inactive, a closed case, a ghost in the machine, finally laid to rest. The elevator doors opened onto the main lobby, the cavernous space, which had felt so intimidating in the morning, now just seemed big. The security guard at the main desk, a large, friendly man named Frank, who had never once made eye contact with me in the hundreds of times I had walked past him, looked up as I approached. Our eyes met. A flicker of recognition, of dawning understanding, crossed his face. He had clearly been watching the internal news feed. As I walked past the desk, he gave me a slow, deliberate nod. "Congratulations, Ms. Calder," he said, his voice quiet but clear. The Ms. Calder was new. I had always been Iris or Han or, more often, nothing at all. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw him not as a piece of the building's furniture, but as a person. I gave him a small nod back. "Frank," I said. It was enough. I kept walking. The folded job offer from Eleanor Hale was a hard rectangle in my pocket. I didn't take it out. I didn't need to. I already knew the answer. The massive, glass-sliding doors of the main entrance hissed open as I approached. A blast of cold, clean Stonefield wind hit my face, whipping a strand of hair across my eyes. It smelled of rain and wet pavement, and the promise of a changing season. I stepped out onto the street. I wasn't carrying a platinum card that offered a world of false luxury. I was carrying nothing but myself, and that self now possessed the absolute, unshakable power to set my own boundaries, the power to say no, the power to define my own worth. I looked up at the sky. The thick gray blanket of clouds that had smothered the city all day had finally begun to break. A single, brilliant shaft of sunlight lanced through a gap in the clouds, striking the wet granite of a building across the street and making it gleam like a promise. I squinted against the sudden, unexpected light, and I smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was a small, quiet, almost imperceptible thing. It was a smile just for me, the only audience that had ever really mattered. There were no more speeches to give. There were no more scores to settle. There was no need to look back. I turned and began to walk, my steps sure and even on the damp sidewalk. The final thought formed in my mind, a quiet, simple, and utterly satisfying conclusion to the argument that had defined my life. Useless doesn't build systems that pay your bills. Behind me, the great glass doors of Weldon and Pike slid shut with a soft, final whoosh. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are. Let's start a conversation and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you really want to support the channel, hit that hype button. It tells the algorithm that this is a story worth hearing and helps push it out to more listeners.